Okay, so I'm in a session on digital subjectivities and virtual worlds. So I'm going to be contrary and talk about stuff. I'm going to talk about materiality to get back to some of the questions of the museum and themes of authenticity, originality, and aura. But I'm going to draw a parallel between the way that some people approach the digital and plastic. So I'm going to be talking about some of the problems of plastic replica objects and the way that they travel and the way that I've traced them through digital culture. So I'm going to start out by talking about plastic beads. These come from Kalinga, part of the Philippines in the northern island of Luzon, a distinct ethnic group. As you can see, I have a slide showing a group of young female Kalinga performers. They're performing at a local festival. They are affiliated to various political campaigns in doing that. A presidential election is underway. And they are using these strands of replica plastic trade beads to perform a new iteration of traditional Kalinga dance. And you'll see these beads really do get around, they really do travel, but I can tell you now, they're made from melted down CD cases, bits of broken plastic crockery, sometimes plastic nurdles, and the white comes from spoons from fast food outlets in the Philippines. And these are really robust, so I'm going to let them crowd surf. So you can have some beads. And I'm going to think about shaping a self through a digital archive. And I'm thinking about Aparai's Migrant Archive from his 2003 chapter, Archive and Aspiration. And this is a site that people refer to right across the Filipino diaspora. So these are not exactly the same girls. That was a bit beyond me, but a very similar group of young women from the same community, dressed in their casual clothes, sitting there where there is a mobile internet signal, and they are all either texting or surfing the web. So the performers themselves are out there in the archive, looking for inspiration, looking for identity and practicing culture. So when I'm looking at this, we're looking at practices of performance and the performativity of a set of self-shaping activities and their digital materiality. So you could describe the self here as being virtual. And you could think about that, and I know it's a problematic word, but it resonates here in three ways. And this is all in the sense that the virtual is an imaginary of a future to come, loosely based on a Deleuzean approach. So we can think of a self that inheres in cyberspace, that these people are learning about themselves from what they see happening in the Migrant Archive, which is digital and online. You also find this virtual self is a site of positive virtues that can be actualized, all the good things that are within them, their pride in their family, their relationships, their culture, their potential to make a contribution to nation and the globe. It is all there waiting for them in their engagements with this archive. And they have a self that's yet to come into being, so it's also virtual. It can be made present in the event of a performance and through its mediation or remediation through things. And these are the things that move with people and across digital fora. So you can follow these beads into performances. And in this slide, you see one of the preeminent Kalinga dance performers, Jenny Bauer-Young. She is from that same village. In fact, some of the girls whose faces you didn't see are her relatives, but she now lives in San Francisco in a place described online as Kalingafornia, Kalinga, California, get it? And she is dancing a dance called Bangka, which is actually a performance based on a colonial era photograph. And it is a dance that was choreographed for her by her father when she was in her very early 20s. It has now become part of the worldwide Kalinga dance repertoire, but it is very much a reinvention of tradition. We don't necessarily talk about that a great deal because it's quite spectacular, and you'll see it in a moment. But what I want to point out about with Jenny is if you look at the beads, the traditional Kalinga bonge that she's wearing across her chest, you will see they are those plastic replicas made by a craftsperson who works with artisanal recovered plastic in her hometown in Kalinga. Jenny does have access to bonge strands of her own families, but they're worth probably 10,000 euros each if they're real, and they're very heavy. So they're not actually all that great for the kind of dancing she's going to be doing, and you'd want to have them insured. They also, because of kinship and inheritance, actually belong to her older sister, and as a second daughter, she won't inherit them, she can only borrow them. And this is something that needs to be negotiated with the family because the older sister hasn't married. So these have a sacred presence. They have to be propitiated with sacrifices of animals and rituals every year if they are the real trade beads. But the plastic trade beads travel quite happily, and in fact the family has strands of them and individual beads on pieces of reed as sort of artistic displays around the house. And they're what Jenny wears. So just to pop in there, we'll just go and see Jenny on YouTube.
What if you put it full screen?
There it is. It's Jenny on the right. She's dancing with a stack of water jars on her head. And of course, what everybody does is count the number of jars an individual performer can manage without smashing them. They are, in fact, now trying to get plastic rather than ceramic water jars, but she was initially dancing with 6 or 7 ceramic antique jars on her head. It took a lot of rehearsal. And that's just a short clip. Here come the guys with the gongs. But what I want to show you is the little narrative. Master artist Jenny Bauer is the dancer on the right. This dance shows her mastery in Kalinga dance because of her ability to fluidly balance the pots on her head, also known as banga, and this was performed at the Northern Cordillera of the Philippines Ethnic Association, BIBAC, in Northern California at the big Thanksgiving celebration. And you can read more about it, but the point of that being that it's part of the Migrant Archive and it's out there, and accessible to those girls in Kalinga. So you can follow these beads into global performances, and you can see that people are fangirling Jenny on social media. So you have this authenticity politics where these replica items of material culture are circulating, where they're being appropriated, where they're being used in new ways. So you saw those girls in Kalinga with the beads tucked into the waistband of their skirt, making these graceful arm movements. Well, you'll find that'll turn up in Leiden and maybe with Kalinga people here in the Netherlands as well, that they'll see this recorded on Facebook or on YouTube. It will come up through their social media feed, and the next time they do a cultural performance, they will try and appropriate it to their own ends. And to do this, and to do it in the fairly spectacular, quite busy fashion, again, a new invention within tradition, to do this in the style that Jenny's wearing, these beads have now been shipped all around the world from these little artisanal producers who are working with recycled plastic in the Philippines. So they're turning up everywhere. So you have this virtual space where objects make connections and bounce back as signifiers of a culture that is evolving, but it's also happening through digital media. And now I want to switch objects ever so slightly. And I want to talk about this. This is Pasiking, a traditional mountain province, probably northern Kankanai designed backpack. And you can see that examples of the Pasiking are found in the collections here in the Netherlands at the Tropenmuseum. And I got one of the, very kindly, the curators sent me information on what they actually had available. And the most recent collection is an example of a rattan backpack that comes from 1986. But the first collection here is in 1898. So you have them here. But we also collected items made in plastic for an exhibition that we put together in Baguio City in 2012. People started making these backpacks out of plastic as well as rattan, but the plastic backpacks emerged really in the late 1990s, early 2000s. It's going to go crowd surfing. You can stage it and take pictures. And the lovely thing about this is it's another example of repurposed plastic, and it's made out of the wrappers for the blasting caps that they use in the gold mines. So there's a specific area where they do gold mining, and they use a lot of primadet, and this is blasting cap wrappers. The guys have the skills to make this traditional form. They sit in the tunnels of the mines and use the waste from blasting to create these backpacks. First, they traded them. They're mostly exchanged. And again, what's preserved is the form. The material is new. And we'll just send this out. You can give it a good fondle. The exciting thing about it is, as far as airport security can tell, between here, Singapore, the UK, and the Philippines, there are no explosives residues left. So this is always, my dean always loves it when I take my backpack out. He's like, where are you taking it today? What's on it? But what was interesting with these backpacks was that they are this statement, and fairly powerful, of male potency, kind of sticking it to the man. They've been smuggled out of one of the mining communities where you're really not supposed to take waste off-site. They've been appropriated from global capital into traditional craft. They are very finely made. They show a lot of skill, and they're quite kitsch and feminine in their design and colors, and they're usually worn by pretty burly guys who are stomping about town. And so you see them in the wild, and people kind of collect them. So there are a couple of street scenes from Baguio City that friends of mine who are cultural practitioners in the Philippines have picked up on. So the bottom right, you see exactly one of these guys. He's been just shot from the back on the streets of Baguio. He's walking around with his pink and yellow backpack, and he's on Facebook. And the point that's being made is exactly that there is this play with pink and yellow and kitsch material. It's an aesthetic in the Philippines called baduy. It's quite feminized, and it's contrasted against his kind of working class masculinity and potency. But what it says is he's got a permanent job, he's working in the mines, and he's got the whole sort of set of traditional craft skills. So if he can make that kind of backpack for himself, he can also do a whole bunch of other things, like build a house kind of cut to measure from scratch with a bunch of friends, and slaughter a pig or a cow and butcher it properly and cook over an open fire, and you know what you're getting. So there's quite a lot of swagger that comes with these backpacks, I've got to tell you. And you see guys, this guy not in particular, but I found this on Facebook. I have a couple of shots of one of the guys we bought a backpack off of, and he had styled it up in black, all black, to show off his pink and yellow with red trim backpack. That's the one on the top left. And it was just amazing, because he'd chosen his outfit for the day to set off his accessories. And we had a great discussion about this, because that was what he needed to say on the day. Then the top picture is actually a picture of a woman, also in Baguio City, using another kind of backpack that has been repurposed out of plastic webbing straps. And it's not quite as robust a design. It's similar design to the one in the collection here, but you see these around town. One of my friends, again, grabbed the shot and put it up on Instagram with filters and aestheticized it in a particular way to talk about this reinvention of tradition. So just like you can follow the beads into particular kinds of performances, you can follow these plastic items into expressions of indigenous potency and potentially anti-capitalism, sort of critical masculinity. And there's can open up to a much broader discussion through digital media of cultural authenticity and the kind of significance of appropriating these objects. The last thing I want to say about these backpacks is that initially they were novelty items and they were kept out of the ritual realm. But when we were putting together our exhibition, and this is the flyer, the poster from the exhibition that we had in Baguio, when we were collecting for the exhibition, we found that people were now using these plastic backpacks to hold their sacred regalia. So we were seeing people dancing in rituals out in remote villages and people practicing as traditional priests, or you could say shaman, who were doing ritual activities, who were using plastic backpacks to hold their sacred objects, and they'll be called takba if they're used for the sacred. So initially people said, oh, you'd never have a plastic takba, that's just for fashion in the city. Sure enough, I've got a photographer friend and he's out there and he sees people using a plastic takba. So what does he do? He takes a picture and he puts it on Facebook. But I want to get permission from the person being depicted before I rip that and share it with you. So you have this resonance with which objects are circulating. But what I can say about this particular exhibition was we had a very successful small gallery exhibition. It traveled to 2 other galleries, one in Manila and another one at the University of the Philippines in Baguio. We were not able to get our online and digital aspect of the exhibition up and running, partially because of sort of server capacity and skills in Baguio, and partially because we ran out of the little puddle of funding that I was operating out of. So this is something that we think we would like to pursue in the future, because there is a lot of interest in the wider diaspora as to what's happening with these objects and what they say about culture. When we're looking at art in the Philippine diaspora, we do see that there is a lot of interest in digital curation and archiving, but it happens largely with fine art. So these are some of the people I've been talking to, and the Center for Art and Thought, which is a Filipino nonprofit in California, and they largely circulate and archive and promote Filipino migrants' fine art practices, which are really wonderful, but they don't necessarily get that closely involved with ethnic groups and folk culture and indigenous migration. So they're really interesting and mainstream. You might see kind of conceptual art pieces made with melted down plastic spoons here, but you're not going to see the beads and the dancing. They're sort of living in another part of the migrant archive. And one of the things I'd like to try and do eventually is bring them together to get the cultural practitioners speaking to what's happening in this archive, because this is very much gallery focused and has a kind of resonance in a different way in the migrant archive and the sort of global translocal cultural fields. So what I find really interesting is the things, the images, the sound bites, the video clips, the GIFs that travel along with these objects when they go out into the digital. So one of the ritual priests who has some plastic, pink and yellow plastic trimmed things in his ritual accoutrements is my friend Lakagatilan, who is there on the right, having just completed a chicken sacrifice. And another sort of thing that was traveling along with this, because many of these dance celebrations, like the one Jenny was dancing at, are kanyaos. They're Thanksgiving celebrations and celebratory rituals for the good harvest and good luck. And the same things, the same celebrations happen back in the Philippines. So what you see here is a screenshot of a Facebook post from Jenny's younger sister where she is sharing the sacrificial animals that her family will slaughter in the ritual back in Kalinga. So these are traveling along with the simultaneous celebrations, and they're out there in the digital world as well. So as I said to a couple of my colleagues last night, you know, Facebook, what do you do with all the animal sacrifice that turns up on your feed? And I mean, well, it turns up on my feed because I like it, and I like it to show people I understand why they're putting it there, and I know what they're doing, and I know that some of their ritual propitiation of success and things probably includes some of the research I've engaged them in. So if I'm part of that community, I know that they're slaughtering that pig for the greater good, and therefore like. But the problem is Facebook has now been trained to think that any time anybody sacrifices an animal that I might know, I need the video on my feed. So this is just a way of saying that my Facebook is surely different from your Facebook. And I'm not quite sure what the people I'm following are entirely seeing on their feeds, but they're seeing some of this. So there's this really interesting potential project here where you can contextualize these plastic replica objects as they travel with all the other innovations and remediations that they're traveling with, and look at the ways that people have engaged them. So what makes these objects potent is their circulation and remediation and their attachment to the sacred. So if those beads are not in and of themselves sacred, they're evoking the sacred. If that backpack is not takpa, if it's not holding the sacred, it's reminding you of the object that does, that is in the possession of the ritual priest, who is maybe a member of your kin group back in your hometown, but nonetheless doing rituals for the success of migrants in the UK. And, you know, I've been convinced he's doing rituals for the success of my book, which, you know, they seem to be working reasonably well so far. And, you know, we're all participating in this. And this is traveling and being transformed by the digital, because you have to worry about issues like lighting and your equipment and all the materiality of actually doing this. I mean, getting the internet on and being able to upload it. I've got great pictures of Jenny out taping people with her iPad, and, you know, the family fooling around with the satellite internet setup that they've got. But one of the things that really resonated for them was thinking about Kalinga and living in a virtual village, which is, you know, what I described they might be doing, and they said that's exactly it. So what I want to do is sort of draw out slightly past that and return to these young female performers, because when I met with Kalinga people doing cultural performances in London, I discovered that, yeah, I finally encountered the Jenny Bauer Young fangirls. And, you know, I sort of walked up to people and said, oh, yeah, I see you were in the Kalinga performance at this Filipino indigenous cultural night. And the woman on the top left said, yes, where are you from? And she gave me the name of the community. And I said, oh, I have some friends in Lubuaga and Bowers. And she said, oh, yes, I know them. Jenny's like my hero. And I look at her dancing on YouTube all the time. I follow her performances to get ideas for the things that we're going to try here. And really interesting thing that she was doing was I took a picture of her out of her performing costume. So she'd taken off her plastic beads, but she'd kept the small strand of real, authentic trade beads that she'd brought with her from Kalinga. And you can see that some of the beads are similar to a strand of Kalinga beads that are in the collections here in Leiden. But they're actually, her beads were taken into Kalinga and put together at a more recent point in time. But she wears those every day as a marker of her Kalinga identity. Whereas this other young woman down on the right, who was in one of the beauty pageant aspects of it, is wearing a strand of the replica bonge beads that just traveled around the room. And when I asked her where she got those, she said she inherited them from her grandmother. And I looked at her and I'm like, no, I think my friend Feli made them in Luboaga. I mean, I've got photographs of the production site. So there's this idea of this politics of authenticity and fakery being played out over this engagement with online archived cultural practice as a site where people are locating their subjectivities. These young women are studying in London, and part of the diaspora from the northern Luzon region, and there's a whole bunch of remixture, admixture, and cross-fertilization between the different ethnic groups in a kind of friendly competition around the dancing and the performance. And you're starting to see little bits of plastic craft, knitting, basketware turn up there as well. So the objects carrying tradition are being taken up in new ways. The replicas, this problematic plastic, are being repurposed to this global cultural practice, you know, shaped in the digital archive and with its heroines. And you have this kind of plasticity, and this works really well in Filipino. We got any Filipino speakers? Plastican, you have the plasticity of the subject and the future that they can bring into being, which is intimately tied to the actual materiality of the plastic that they're working with. Just as that happens with plastic, it's also tied to the potential to remediate and change things, link up, share, and shift meaning in digital fora. Thank you.